Picture this. You're a modern naval commander. You have guided missiles, radar systems, satellite navigation. You think you're at the peak of naval warfare, right? Dead wrong. 600 years ago, a Chinese admiral had cannons that fired in 8 directions at once, weapons that shot 100 bullets in seconds. Technology so advanced, it made European ships look like toys. Everything you know about ancient warfare, about to be destroyed. Stay with me for 20 minutes. I'll show you 10 ancient Chinese weapons that didn't just change sea warfare. They revolutionized it centuries before Europe even knew gunpowder existed. Here's what's really happening. You've been lied to about history. That story you learned in school about European naval power? Fiction. Pure fiction. The truth. Ancient Chinese naval weapons were so far ahead that European powers spent centuries trying to catch up. And they're still catching up. This isn't conspiracy theory nonsense. This investigation uses documented Ming Dynasty naval records, archaeological evidence from recovered cannon pieces, analysis of Zheng He's treasure ship specs. We've combined findings from maritime studies, weapon research, and preserved military documents. Today, we're diving into history's most buried secret: how ancient Chinese naval weapons revolutionized sea warfare centuries before the West understood gunpowder. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how these 10 weapons changed naval warfare forever, why this knowledge was buried, and how these ancient innovations built the foundation for every naval battle since. But first, answer this. Comment below right now. What's the most advanced weapon you think existed 600 years ago? I guarantee you're wrong, and I'm about to prove it. Here's where it gets crazy. While European ships used basic catapults and crossbows, Chinese naval commanders had mastered something else: gunpowder artillery at sea. But here's the kicker. This wasn't 1 or 2 cannons per ship. Ming Dynasty vessels carried 8 to 10 Folangji cannons as standard. Each ship was a floating fortress packed with advanced artillery. Think about that. 8 to 10 cannons per ship in the 1400s. European ships of the same time, maybe 1 cannon if they were lucky. But wait, it gets more insane. The Chinese had something called the Bamian Shenwei Pao. Translation: the 8-direction divine power cannon. This weapon fired in 8 different directions at the same time. Let me paint you a picture. You're commanding an enemy fleet. You approach a Chinese warship. You think you're safe attacking from the side while their main cannon faces forward. Suddenly, cannon fire erupts from everywhere: front, back, left, right, all the angles between. Your entire battle plan just became useless. Here's proof that will shock you. When Portuguese traders first saw these weapons in Chinese waters during the 1500s, they were blown away. They reverse-engineered them. They even kept the Chinese name. They called their copied cannons Folangji, after the original Chinese design. But here's what school never taught you. European cannon innovation wasn't innovation. It was poorly copied Chinese technology. The Portuguese literally named their cannons after the Chinese originals because they couldn't improve the design. The technical gap wasn't even close. Chinese Folangji cannons had better range, better accuracy, better reliability, better than anything Europeans would make for the next 200 years. This destroys the story that European naval power came from original innovation. It didn't. It came from copying superior Chinese technology, then writing the Chinese out of history books. But cannons were just the start. The Chinese had already solved a problem that would plague naval warfare for centuries. How do you control multiple enemies at once while keeping devastating firepower? Now, Chinese naval innovation gets truly terrifying. While other civilizations figured out how to make one cannon work, Chinese weapons designers moved to a different problem. How do you overwhelm multiple enemies at once? Their solution? The breech-loading, the 100-bullet cannon. This weapon fired 100 bullets in quick succession. Think about that. 100 bullets from one weapon in the 1400s. This wasn't just a cannon. This was ancient crowd control technology. But they didn't stop there. They also made the wankuchong, a gun with a bowl-shaped mouth designed for piercing ship hulls. While the breech-loading suppressed enemy crews, the wankuchong destroyed their ships. Here's the tactical genius European naval commanders wouldn't understand for centuries. The Chinese created overlapping fields of fire, multiple weapons working together to control the entire battlefield. Ming Dynasty naval manuals describe exactly how this worked. The breech-loading would fire its 100 bullets to pin down enemy crew on deck. Meanwhile, wankuchong cannons would target the ship's structure. Enemy crews couldn't fight back because they were pinned by suppressing fire, and their ships were being destroyed by hull-piercing weapons. This is suppressing fire that modern militaries use today. Ancient Chinese naval commanders used this strategy 400 years before European tacticians even had a word for it. Archaeological evidence confirms these weapons were placed strategically on Chinese warships to create overlapping fire zones. This wasn't random placement. This was sophisticated tactical planning that European navies wouldn't use until the 1700s. Here's the mind-blowing part. European military historians credit coordinated naval artillery to British and Dutch innovations in the 16 and 1700s. But Chinese naval commanders had perfected this approach 3 centuries earlier. The technology gap wasn't decades, it was centuries. But while other civilizations threw spears and shot arrows, the Chinese had moved beyond projectiles to something far more terrifying: weaponized fire itself. This is where ancient Chinese naval warfare becomes nightmare fuel. Fire lances, early gunpowder flame weapons made specifically for naval combat. These weren't just weapons. They were psychological warfare tools that could break enemy morale before real fighting started. But here's what makes this revolutionary. While European knights charged with swords and European ships used basic archery, Chinese naval forces deployed ancient flamethrowers. Chinese military records document exactly how fire lances worked in naval combat. These early gunpowder weapons shot flames and bullets at the same time. The combination created physical damage and psychological terror among enemy crews. Historical accounts describe how these weapons worked in close naval fights. The flames would light enemy sails and rigging on fire. The bullets would kill or wound crew members. But the psychological impact was even worse. Imagine you're an enemy sailor. You've never seen gunpowder weapons before. Suddenly, flames shoot from enemy ships like dragon's breath. Your sails catch fire. Your fellow sailors scream. The air itself seems to burn around you. Most crews abandoned ship at first sight of these flame weapons. The battle ended before it really began. But the Chinese didn't stop with fire lances. They also made naval mines, sea-based explosive devices from their landmine technology. These were some of the world's first naval mines, centuries before European navies even understood the concept. Think about the strategic implications. Chinese naval commanders could control entire waterways with these weapons. Enemy fleets couldn't approach Chinese positions without risking explosions that could sink entire ships. The technology gap wasn't just about individual weapons. It was about completely different approaches to naval warfare. Europeans still thought about ship-to-ship combat with traditional weapons. Chinese commanders thought about area denial, psychological warfare, and technological force multiplication. While European knights charged with swords, Chinese naval forces had moved into early modern warfare. The technology gap wasn't decades, it was centuries. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Chinese understood something about naval warfare that took the rest of the world 500 years to figure out. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't about destruction, it's about control. Now we get to tactical genius that modern naval special forces still use today. While other civilizations focused on sinking enemy ships, Chinese naval commanders figured out something far more valuable: how to capture ships intact while eliminating the crew. Their solution? A sophisticated system of grappling weapons that gave them total battlefield control. The Gulian, hooked bamboo poles designed specifically for cutting enemy rigging and controlling ship movement. But these weren't simple hooks. They were precision tools that could disable enemy steering, cut critical ropes, or hook onto ships for boarding. The Laodiao, 3-pronged spears that served dual purposes. They could hook enemy ships for close combat, or they could be used as weapons for close-quarters fighting once boarding began. Here's the tactical brilliance European naval commanders wouldn't understand for centuries. Chinese naval forces combined these grappling tactics with their ranged weapons for total battlefield control. Ming naval documentation describes exactly how this system worked. Chinese ships would use their superior cannons to damage enemy vessels and suppress crew resistance. Then, they would use Gulian to disable enemy steering and rigging. Finally, they would use Laodiao to hook enemy ships and begin boarding operations. This wasn't random fighting. This was systematic ship capture that preserved valuable cargo while eliminating enemies. Think about the strategic advantage. Instead of sinking enemy ships and losing everything on board, Chinese naval forces could capture intact vessels, cargo, and even surviving crew members for intelligence. European naval tactics of the same period: ram the enemy ship and hope for the best, or try to sink it with whatever weapons you had. The Chinese approach was infinitely more sophisticated. But here's what will blow your mind. Modern naval boarding tactics used by special forces today are refined versions of techniques Chinese naval commanders perfected 600 years ago. The fundamentals haven't changed. Suppress enemy resistance with superior firepower. Control enemy ship movement with grappling tools. board and capture with specialized close combat weapons. Chinese naval commanders had figured out the basic principles of modern naval special operations centuries before European navies even understood coordinated tactics. This represented sophisticated understanding of naval warfare that combined ranged artillery, ship control, and close quarters combat into one integrated system. European navies wouldn't develop comparable tactical integration until the 1800s. So why don't we know about this technological superiority? Why did this knowledge disappear while inferior European methods dominated history books? Here's the part that will make you question everything you learned about history. This superior Chinese naval technology didn't disappear because it was inferior. It disappeared because of politics. When the Ming dynasty implemented isolationist policies in the 1430s following the end of Zheng He's voyages, China made a deliberate decision. They stopped sharing military technology with other nations. They stopped their massive naval expeditions. They reduced technological exchange with the outside world. This shift coincided perfectly with European maritime expansion. European powers, who had been copying Chinese innovations for decades, suddenly had to develop their own inferior versions. But here's the crucial part. Rather than admit their technological dependence, European historians simply wrote Chinese contributions out of naval warfare history. Think about the implications. The age of exploration wasn't about European innovation. It was about Europeans finally catching up to technology the Chinese had mastered centuries earlier. Portuguese cannons? Copied from Chinese Folangji designs. Dutch naval tactics? Inferior versions of Chinese coordinated artillery? British naval supremacy? Built on the foundation of Chinese innovations developed 3 centuries earlier. Modern archaeological discoveries are proving the advanced nature of Chinese naval weapons. Recent excavations of Ming Dynasty shipwrecks show cannon placements and weapon systems that were far more sophisticated than anything Europeans developed until the 1700s. But the historical narrative had already been written. European colonial powers controlled the history books. They had no interest in admitting that their naval dominance was built on copying superior Chinese technology. The Great Suppression wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. European powers systematically minimized non-Western innovations to support their narrative of technological and cultural superiority. This is why you've never heard this story before. This is why your history textbooks focus on European naval innovation while ignoring the Chinese foundations that made it all possible. The truth has been buried for centuries, but archaeological evidence and careful historical research are finally bringing it back to light. So here's what I want you to think about as you go about your day. We live in a world where we're constantly told that progress only moves forward, that ancient civilizations were primitive compared to modern technology, that innovation comes from the West and spreads to the rest of the world. But what if that's all wrong? What if the most revolutionary discoveries come from understanding what we've deliberately forgotten? What if the ancients weren't primitive at all? What if we've just been taught to ignore their genius? These 10 ancient Chinese naval weapons prove that technological superiority isn't about when you live. It's about how you think. Chinese naval commanders 600 years ago were thinking centuries ahead of their time. They understood principles of warfare that we're still using today. The question is, what other buried knowledge is waiting to be rediscovered? What other innovations have been written out of history because they don't fit the narrative we've been taught? If this investigation into suppressed naval history opened your eyes to how much we've been misled about ancient technology, hit that like button. It tells YouTube that real historical research matters more than recycled textbook myths. Comment below right now, which of these 10 weapons shocked you the most? And share this video with anyone who still believes European naval superiority was built on original innovation rather than copied Chinese technology. The ancients weren't primitive. We've just been taught to ignore their genius. It's time to remember what we've forgotten.